The desert was wide and endless. Golden sand stretched in every direction, like a sea without water. The sun burned fiercely above, and the air shimmered with heat. In this lonely place walked a man named Daniel, carrying only a backpack, a flask of water, and an old metal detector. Daniel was no ordinary traveler. He was a seeker of lost things, a man who believed the desert held secrets of the past, old war relics, forgotten treasures, and pieces of history buried deep under the sand. Most people laughed at him, saying the desert was empty and cruel, but Daniel's heart told him otherwise. For 3 days he wandered across the dunes, his lips dry, his skin cracked by the sun. The wind sang strange songs through the empty land, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp like whispers. But Daniel kept walking, scanning the sand with his detector, listening for the one sound he longed to hear. On the 4th evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned red, his machine gave a sudden beep. His heart raced. The sound was sharp, clear, and steady. He dropped to his knees and began to dig with his hands, his fingers clawing through the hot sand. At first, he uncovered only rocks and dust, but soon his hand struck something hard, something unnatural. It was a corner of metal, dark and strange, unlike any he had seen before. He brushed away more sand, revealing edges, lines, and then a full surface. It was a crate, half buried in the desert floor, black and smooth, with markings that glowed faintly in the fading light. Daniel froze, his heart thundering. This was no ordinary box, no weapon, no treasure chest. He touched the metal. It was cold, too cold for the desert heat. The air around him seemed to shiver, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. And then, from deep inside the crate, came a sound. A faint, trembling whisper. "Don't open it." Daniel stumbled back, his knees pressing into the sand. His breath caught in his throat, his eyes wide with disbelief. He looked around, but the desert was empty. No one was there. No voice should have been there. Yet he had heard it, clear as water, soft as fear itself. His first thought was that it must be the wind. The desert wind was tricky, always moving, always whispering. But this voice had shape, had words, had warning. And it came not from the air, but from the box before him. Daniel licked his dry lips and whispered back, his own voice shaking. "Who's there?" The crate gave no answer, only silence. But the weight of that silence pressed on him heavier than the desert sun. He leaned closer, his curiosity stronger than his fear. The markings on the crate seemed to shift under the dying light, as though alive. They glowed faint blue, and carved symbols danced across the surface. Daniel had no idea what language it was. No book could tell him. The whisper returned, softer this time, like a breath brushing against his ear. "Don't open it, please." The plea was desperate, filled with something Daniel could not name. It was not anger, not a threat. It was sorrow, deep and endless sorrow. Daniel shivered despite the burning air. He wanted to walk away, to cover the crate back with sand and pretend he never found it. But his heart would not let him. He had spent his whole life chasing mysteries, and now one had finally found him. The desert sky turned dark, stars spilling across the black horizon. Daniel lit a small fire near his camp, but his eyes never left the crate. It sat there, half out of the sand, silent and heavy, yet alive with something unseen. Every crackle of the fire, every sigh of the wind, he thought he heard the whisper again. Through the long night, Daniel did not sleep. He stared at the box, fighting with himself. One side of him screamed to bury it again, to run, to escape. The other side told him this was his destiny, the reason he had wandered the desert so long. By morning, his choice was made. He would not leave the crate. Whether it held treasure, curse, or secret, it was his now. And as the sun rose over the dunes, the whisper came again, sharper than before. "Do not open it." Daniel's hands trembled, but his eyes burned with determination. For him, this was not just a discovery, it was the beginning of something greater. The desert had finally spoken to him, and he was ready to listen or to defy it. And so began the tale of Daniel and the crate, a story not of sand and silence, but of whispers that could change the fate of worlds. The night after Daniel unearthed the crate felt heavier than any night before. The stars shone bright in the desert sky, yet he felt trapped beneath their cold light. The crate sat near his fire, half buried, its surface glowing faintly with shifting marks. Every flicker of the flame seemed to awaken the strange patterns, as though they were alive. Daniel tried to distract himself, cooking dried meat over the fire, sipping water slowly. But his eyes always returned to the box. It was silent at first, nothing more than a piece of dark metal. Then, as the wind swept across the dunes, the voice came again, low and trembling. "Don't open it, don't open." Daniel froze, his hand clutching the flask tightly. The whisper was clearer than last night, no longer faint, no longer uncertain. It spoke with a strange rhythm, almost like it knew his name, though it had not said it yet. Daniel's skin prickled as the sound sank into his bones. He whispered back, "What are you? Why are you inside this box?" No answer came, only silence. The fire hissed, the wind howled, but the crate remained still. Daniel sighed, rubbing his tired eyes, but deep inside, curiosity grew like fire. If this thing inside could speak, it was alive, or at least something once alive. But why warn him instead of curse him? Why beg instead of threaten? He set a recorder near the crate, his old device meant for documenting discoveries. "Let's see if the world believes me," he muttered. The night stretched on, and he drifted into half-sleep. In his dreams, he saw the crate open on its own, spilling not treasure but shadows. The desert filled with figures, faceless and tall, whispering in thousands of voices, all saying the same words, "Don't open it." Daniel woke with a start, gasping for air. His recorder was still running, the red light blinking. He played it back eagerly, but the tape carried only silence, no whisper, no warning, nothing. His heart sank. Was he going mad? By morning, the sun returned, merciless as ever. Daniel packed his things, but left the crate uncovered, staring at it like a puzzle. He told himself he would carry it to the next town, maybe sell it to collectors, maybe study it. But as he tried to lift it, the crate refused to move. It was impossibly heavy, as though the desert itself had chained it there. He kicked the sand in frustration, wiping sweat from his brow. That was when the whisper came again, stronger than before. This time, it spoke clearly, words stretched by sorrow and fear. "Daniel, leave me buried." His blood turned cold. It knew his name. His heart thundered, and he stumbled back. No wind could carry his name. No trick of the mind could invent that voice. Something inside the crate was aware of him, watching him, speaking to him. He shouted at it, his voice trembling. "What are you? How do you know me? What are you hiding?" The crate vibrated faintly, the markings glowing brighter. But the whisper did not answer, not fully. It only said, "If you open me, you will never return the same." Daniel sank to his knees in the sand. Every instinct told him to run, to leave the crate behind. But another voice, his own pride, burned louder. He had searched for years, suffered storms, hunger, thirst, loneliness. And now the desert had given him something extraordinary. How could he abandon it? That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, shadows stretched long across the dunes. Daniel sat close to the crate, his hands trembling near its cold surface. The whisper came again and again, sometimes begging, sometimes warning, don't open, please." Yet with each word, Daniel's resolve grew sharper. What kind of secret feared discovery so much that it begged to stay hidden? He looked up at the stars, his jaw clenched. "I don't care what you are," he whispered. "I came here for answers, and I will get them." The desert wind howled in reply, almost like laughter, almost like mourning, and as Daniel lay down to rest, the crate pulsed faintly with blue light. The whispers never stopped, filling his dreams, wrapping around his thoughts. It was no longer just a box in the sand. It was a living mystery, a forbidden voice. And Daniel knew one thing with certainty. He would not walk away, not now, not ever. The desert had given him the greatest discovery of his life. Even if the whisper promised that discovery would cost him his soul. The desert was quiet, but Daniel no longer felt alone. For 2 nights he had slept beside the crate, and each night the whispers grew sharper, colder, closer. They spoke in warning, sometimes in sorrow, but always with the same command, don't open it. Daniel, however, could not turn away. Curiosity had chained him more tightly than the sand itself. On the 3rd morning, as the sun rose high and painted the dunes gold, Daniel noticed something strange. In the distance, small shapes moved against the horizon, dark against the sea of sand. At first, he thought it was a mirage. The desert often played tricks on tired eyes. But as the shapes drew closer, he saw cloaked figures walking slowly, their steps steady, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Daniel's hand instinctively went to the small knife he carried at his side. His heart raced, his mouth dry. The strangers stopped a short distance from his camp, their shadows long in the sun. There were 3 of them, tall and silent, each holding a long staff that seemed carved with runes of their own. They stood in a half circle around the crate, ignoring Daniel completely, their attention fixed on the black box. Finally, one of them spoke, his voice deep and calm. You should not have touched it, human. Daniel stiffened, gripping his knife tighter. Who are you? What do you want? He demanded. The second figure, a woman by her voice, tilted her head. We are the guardians of silence, keepers of what should remain buried, she said slowly. Her words carried weight, as though they had been spoken for centuries. Daniel forced a laugh, though it sounded weak even to his own ears. So, you knew about this? You left it here in the middle of the desert and expected no one to find it. The first guardian shook his head. It was never meant for your kind, he said. The whisper belongs to a past far older than your world. It should remain where it lies. Daniel glanced at the crate, then back at them. It talks to me, he said, his voice dropping low. It knows my name. It warns me not to open it, but that only means there's something important inside. The third figure stepped forward, his staff pressing into the sand. Important, yes, he said, his voice sharp like a blade, but not in the way you think. If you break its seal, it will not give you riches, not power, not salvation, only ruin. The words hit Daniel like cold wind, but still his pride flared. You don't know what I've been through. I've spent years searching these deserts. People call me a fool. They said I would find nothing, and now I have found the one thing that proves them all wrong. The woman's voice grew harsh. Your stubbornness blinds you. Human, you think discovery is always glory, but sometimes discovery is death. The desert grew still, the wind dying down as though even the air listened. Daniel shook his head, stepping between them and the crate. No, he said firmly, I won't give it up. This is mine. I found it. The guardians lowered their heads, as if mourning. One by one, they turned away, their cloaks billowing in the heat. As they began to walk back into the endless sands, the first guardian stopped, looking over his shoulder. We warned you, he said, his voice heavy. When the whisper becomes a scream, you will remember us. Then they vanished into the desert, their forms swallowed by the golden horizon, leaving Daniel alone once more. Silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. Daniel sat by the crate, his hands trembling, his mind torn between fear and defiance. Who were these guardians? How did they know about the box? How many years had they watched it rest under the sand? And if they feared it so much, what could be inside? The whisper came again, softer this time, almost like a sigh. Please listen to them. Leave me. Daniel closed his eyes, pressing his hands against his ears. Enough, he muttered. Stop whispering. Stop begging. You're not real. You're only trying to scare me. But deep inside, he knew it was real, more real than anything else in the desert. As night fell, Daniel's fire burned low. The guardian's words echoed in his head, their warning heavy like chains. Yet his curiosity remained unbroken, even stronger now. He looked at the crate, its surface glowing faintly in the starlight. "They don't want me to open you," he whispered. "That only makes me want it more." The whisper answered, sorrow dripping from its voice. "Then you are already lost." The desert wind rose that night, carrying sharp blades of sand across the dunes. Daniel sat by the fire, but the flames bent sideways under the storm's breath. The crate pulsed faintly, blue light glowing in rhythm like a heartbeat. Every flicker of light sent shivers down Daniel's spine. The whisper had returned again and again, always the same desperate plea, "Don't open it, please." But Daniel's mind was no longer steady. The warnings of the guardians echoed, yet his pride burned hotter than fear. He could not walk away, not now, not after so many years of searching. His hands shook as he brushed sand from the lid of the crate, tracing the glowing lines with his fingers. The symbols shifted beneath his touch, twisting into shapes he could not understand. The storm outside grew stronger, thunder rolling across the endless desert sky. Daniel's heart pounded, sweat dripping down his face. His knife felt heavy in his hand as he slipped the blade into the seam of the crate. The whisper turned into a sharp cry, no longer soft, no longer begging. "Stop! You don't know what waits inside." Daniel froze, his breath ragged. He almost pulled away, almost let fear win. But then he remembered the look of the guardians, their cold eyes, their cryptic warnings. They wanted him to leave it. They wanted him to walk away. Why? What were they afraid of him finding? With a sharp push, Daniel forced the blade deeper. A hiss escaped the box, like air being released after 1,000 years. The blue glow flared, lighting the entire camp, casting his shadow long and trembling. Daniel stumbled back, shielding his eyes. The sand around the crate trembled, shifting like waves under invisible hands. The voice screamed now, no longer whispering, "You fool! You break what was never meant to be broken." Daniel covered his ears, but the sound was inside his head, vibrating through his skull. His knife clattered to the ground as the crate cracked open. A line of blinding light split the surface, widening slowly, painfully, like an eye opening after centuries. The desert storm grew wild, spirals of sand twisting into the sky. Daniel tried to crawl away, but his gaze was locked on the opening. Inside, there was no treasure, no relic, no weapon. Instead, there was a shape, dark, shifting, alive. A misty figure, small yet powerful, chained in threads of glowing light. It raised its head, though it had no clear face, and the voice that had whispered now filled the desert like thunder. "Now you are mine." Daniel gasped, his body frozen in place, his mind screaming, but his limbs refusing to move. The being inside was not free, not yet, but its presence spilled out like waves of fire, pressing against him, wrapping around his soul. He stumbled back further, clutching his head. Visions burst into his mind, flashing like lightning. Cities burning under alien skies, endless battlefields littered with bones, stars themselves collapsing under chains of shadow. And at the center of it all was the being inside the crate, both prisoner and destroyer. Its voice thundered in his chest. "You broke the seal. Human, you let me breathe again." Daniel screamed, forcing himself to stand. "No, I didn't mean to free you. I just wanted to know." The being's laughter shook the desert, deep and bitter. "Curiosity is always the sharpest blade, and you have cut yourself." The storm suddenly died, silence falling heavy over the dunes. The crate's lid split wide, revealing the chained figure fully. It reached toward Daniel, though its body was smoke and light. The chains held it back, glowing brighter as it strained. "Not yet," it hissed, "but soon you have begun the end." Daniel stumbled away, his chest rising and falling like a trapped animal. He wanted to bury the crate again, to undo what he had done. But the seal was broken, the box could not be closed. And now the desert itself seemed different, darker, alive with watching eyes. The whispers had changed. They were no longer warnings, no longer soft. They filled the night like an army of voices, echoing across the dunes. He opened it. He opened it. He opened it. Daniel fell to his knees, sand clinging to his hands. The guardians had been right, he thought, but it was too late. The crate was no longer just a box. It was a doorway, and Daniel had been the one to turn the key. The desert would never be silent again, and neither would he. The desert was no longer silent. After the crate split open, the air itself seemed alive. Daniel sat trembling beside the fire, his eyes fixed on the strange figure trapped within the glowing chains. It shifted like smoke, but moved like a living thing, its form rising and falling with a rhythm almost like breathing. The whispers that once begged him to stop now spoke differently. They no longer warned, they no longer pleaded. Instead, they pressed into his mind with weight, heavy and cold. You broke the seal. Now you hear me fully. Daniel clutched his head, pressing his palms to his ears, but the voice was not outside, it was inside. Every thought felt touched by it. Every heartbeat seemed to echo with its words. What are you? Daniel shouted, his voice trembling. The figure raised what could have been a hand, smoke twisting into the shape of fingers chained in light. I am what your kind fears but cannot name. I am the silence between stars, the prisoner of forgotten wars. Daniel shook his head violently, stumbling backward in the sand. I don't believe you. I don't even know if you're real. The being's voice rumbled, soft yet sharp. You know, I am real. Your fear proves it. And now, your life is mine. Images flooded Daniel's mind without warning. He saw alien landscapes, broken cities under skies of fire, mountains split in half by weapons not of earth. He saw armies falling into silence, their voices ripped away. And through it all, the chained figure stood, a shadow at the center of endless destruction. Daniel gasped, collapsing to his knees. What do you want from me? He whispered. The figure leaned forward, the chains crackling as it pulled against them. Not want, need. You touched the seal. You became the bridge. Without you, I cannot leave. With you, I can stretch beyond these chains. Daniel's chest tightened, his breath shallow. He wanted to deny it, to scream that it wasn't true. But deep inside, something stirred, a faint pulse that was not his own heartbeat. The voice laughed softly. Do you feel it? The bond has begun. Your strength feeds me. Your fear feeds me. And soon, your will shall feed me too. Daniel stumbled away from the crate, clutching his chest. The desert around him looked wrong. The stars seemed sharper, the shadows darker. Every sound carried weight. Every grain of sand seemed to whisper. He realized with horror that he was hearing the desert through the voice, as if their minds were connected. No, he muttered, shaking his head. I won't let you. I won't be your prisoner. The figure's chains glowed brighter, restraining its reach. Prisoner? No, Daniel. Not prisoner, partner. Together we can be more than what you are. I can give you strength no human has ever touched. I can show you truths no human has ever seen. Daniel's heart pounded, torn between terror and temptation. He had always been the outcast, mocked for his endless search in the desert. People laughed, people doubted, but here was proof that he had found something beyond them all. Power, knowledge, discovery, everything he had craved, but wrapped in a voice that chilled his very soul. The night stretched endlessly, the voice never leaving his mind. Sometimes it spoke gently, like a friend, showing him visions of victory, of standing tall against enemies he had never faced. Sometimes it spoke harshly, reminding him of chains, of hunger, of shadows that consumed whole worlds. By dawn, Daniel's eyes were bloodshot, his body weak. He realized he had not slept, could not sleep. The bond would not let him. As the sun rose, he stood at the edge of the dune, staring out across the endless sands. He could feel the entity's presence inside him now, faint but constant like a second heartbeat. No matter how far he walked, no matter how much he tried to push it away, the voice followed. You cannot run. You cannot hide. You chose me when you opened the crate, and now you are mine. Daniel clenched his fists, his face pale, but his jaw set. If he was truly bound, if the desert had chosen him to carry this burden, then he would not run. But he would not bow either. "I don't care what you are," he said through gritted teeth. "If I'm bound to you, then you are bound to me, and I'll decide what happens." The desert wind rose again, carrying his words into the horizon. The figure inside the crate shifted, its chains trembling as if struck by his defiance. For the first time, the voice was silent, and Daniel, though trembling, felt a spark of strength within himself. The bond had begun, but the question remained, was Daniel in control, or was he only the first piece to break? The desert was no longer empty. Daniel felt it with every step, as if unseen eyes followed him across the dunes. The bond with the chained entity had changed him. His senses stretched further, sharper, his heartbeat no longer his alone. The whisper inside his head grew stronger, sometimes soft like silk, sometimes sharp like a blade. "You are mine now, Daniel. Your voice is my voice. Your strength is my strength." Daniel tried to resist, clenching his fists as he walked. "No, I'm not yours. I'm not your servant," he muttered. But even as he said it, he knew the bond was real. The desert wind carried thoughts that were not his. The stars above seemed to pulse in rhythm with the voice. He was no longer only himself. He was something more and something less. By the third night, after opening the crate, the silence broke. Figures appeared again on the horizon, cloaked in black, staffs glowing faintly under the moon. The guardians had returned, their steps steady, their eyes fixed on him. Daniel's chest tightened as they approached. The leader raised his staff and spoke with a voice like thunder. "You broke the seal, human, and now the desert itself will bleed." Daniel stood tall, though his body shook with exhaustion. "I didn't free it," he said quickly. "It's still chained. I can keep it chained." The guardians' eyes narrowed, their hoods hiding their faces. "You are a fool," the woman said coldly. "The moment you touched the crate, the bond was forged. It cannot be undone. You are its vessel, its key, and soon its weapon." Daniel's anger boiled. "You talk like you care about protecting the world, but you left this thing buried out here, waiting for someone like me to find it. If it's so dangerous, why didn't you destroy it?" The third guardian struck his staff into the sand, sparks flashing from its tip. "It cannot be destroyed," he said. "It can only be contained, bound in silence, hidden where greedy hands cannot reach it. And now, because of you, the silence is broken." The voice inside Daniel's head laughed, low and bitter. "Do you hear them, Daniel? They fear me. They fear what I am. They call me destroyer because I was never theirs to control. They do not protect your world. They only seek to keep power from your kind." Daniel's mind spun, the guardians warning him on one side, the entity whispering on the other. "Why should I trust either of you?" he shouted. "You hide truths. You speak in riddles. You both want control. But what about me? What about my choice?" The guardians stood firm, their cloaks flapping in the wind. "You had a choice," the leader said, his voice cutting through the night. "You chose wrongly, and now the world will pay." The entity's voice surged louder, filling his chest until it was hard to breathe. "They lie, Daniel. They call me ruin because they cannot chain me forever. But with you, I can be free. I can be more, and you'll be more too." Daniel staggered, gripping his head, the whispers crashing against his mind. The guardians raised their staffs, glowing runes circling Daniel in light. The leader spoke again. "Step away from the crate, human, where you will share its fate." The chains around the entity flared, pulling tighter as though the guardian's presence pressed against it. The figure inside hissed in fury, its form shaking violently. "Betrayal, Daniel. They seek to silence us both. They will kill you to keep me hidden." Daniel's heart thundered, sweat dripping from his brow. He looked at the guardians, their eyes burning with certainty. He looked at the crate, the entity chained yet alive, its power pressing against his soul. And he realized the truth. No matter what he chose, someone would call it betrayal. If he sided with the guardians, he would betray the bond already forming in his blood. If he sided with the entity, he would betray humanity itself. The desert wind roared, lifting sand into spirals around them. The guardians raised their staffs higher, glowing light surrounding Daniel like a cage. The entity screamed through him, its voice blasting inside his skull. "Fight them, Daniel. Strike now, or you will die here in silence." Daniel's hands trembled as he reached for his knife. His body no longer felt entirely his own. His thoughts tangled between fear, defiance, and power. The guardians stepped forward as one, their staffs sparking with light. Daniel's voice broke into the night. Half his own, half something else. "No, I decide. I choose." The desert cracked beneath his feet, light from the crate splitting into the sands like veins of fire. The guardians stopped, their faces hidden, but their fear clear at last. Daniel stood at the center of it all, torn between silence and shadow, between loyalty and betrayal. And as the storm howled above, only one truth remained certain. The world would never be the same. The desert storm howled like a living beast. Sand rose in spirals. Lightning cracked across the black sky, and Daniel stood at the center, his body trembling under the weight of two worlds. The crate lay open, its chained prisoner glowing with violent blue light, while the guardians circled him with their staffs raised, their voices sharp with warning. "You are the key, human," the leader shouted. "Seal it now, before all is lost." But inside Daniel's skull, the other voice roared louder, sharper, desperate. "Do not listen, Daniel. They fear you. They fear what we could become together. Break these chains, and we will never bow again." Daniel staggered, clutching his head, his knife trembling in his hand. His breaths came shallow, his heart pounding like war drums. For days he had carried the whisper, and now it was no whisper. It was a scream. The guardians advanced, their lights pressing against the crate, making the entity thrash in its bonds. The ground split open, sand spilling into black cracks that pulsed with light. Daniel's knees sank into the shifting earth, his body pulled between chains of silence and chains of shadow. "Choose, human," the woman guardian cried. "Seal it, or all that you know will burn." The entity laughed through the storm, its voice breaking into Daniel's chest. "Burn, yes, but only for them. For you there will be power, for you there will be freedom." Daniel closed his eyes, flashes of his life rushing before him. The years he had wandered the desert mocked by others, the lonely nights under the stars, the hunger, the thirst, the endless search. He had wanted discovery, proof that he was more than a fool chasing mirages. And now he had it. Yet the price of that discovery was crushing him. The guardians' circle tightened, their staffs blazing. Daniel felt the bond pulling harder, a second heartbeat pounding against his ribs. His knife fell to the sand as his hands rose, one toward the guardians, one toward the crate. The storm froze for a breath, as if the desert itself waited. "I decide," Daniel whispered, his voice echoing with something not entirely human. Lightning split the sky. Fire raced through the cracks in the sand. The guardians cried out, their lights clashing with the glow of the crate. Daniel's mind fractured, half his own, half belonging to the chained being. "Free me," the entity demanded, "and I will make you more than human. You will stand when empires fall. You will be feared and worshipped alike." "Seal it," the guardians shouted. "Sacrifice yourself if you must, but save your world." Daniel's body shook, torn between glory and ruin, pride and sacrifice. For a moment, he imagined opening the chains fully, feeling strength beyond measure, rising as something greater than mankind. But he also saw earth burning, cities swallowed by silence, families lost under shadows, his people crying out for a savior that would never come. Tears burned in his eyes as he screamed into the storm. No more whispers, no more lies, the choice is mine. The desert blazed as he pressed both palms onto the cracked surface of the crate. Energy surged through him, searing his veins, ripping a cry from his throat that was half human, half something else. The chains tightened around the entity, glowing brighter than the sun. It howled in rage, shaking the sands. Daniel, you betray me. You betray yourself. The guardians raised their staffs, pouring their power into his act. Daniel's body burned, every nerve screaming, his soul stretched thin, but he did not let go. The crate roared, the desert split, and with one final blinding flash, the lid slammed shut. The whispers vanished, the voice was silenced. Daniel collapsed into the sand, his breath ragged, his body weak. The guardians lowered their staffs, their cloaks whipping in the dying wind. The leader stepped forward, his voice heavy with sorrow. You chose sacrifice, human, and because of you, the silence holds again. Daniel's eyes flickered open, his lips dry. I didn't do it for you, he whispered. I did it for them. The guardians bowed their heads and turned away, disappearing once more into the horizon. The storm cleared, stars shining cold above. The desert was quiet again, but Daniel knew silence was no longer simple. For inside him, faint and hidden, a second heartbeat still pulsed. The bond was not gone, only chained deeper, and his whisper, weaker than breath, slipped into the night. Sometimes, opening the wrong door is only the beginning.